The second and final day of early voting for South Korea's presidential election takes place until 6 p.m. on Friday. An all-time high of 19.58% of voters cast their ballots early on Thursday. With 4 days left until the actual voting day, the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung heads to Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-do provinces to woo voters, while the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo hops on a 90-hour non-stop overnight campaign until the end of the campaign period without returning home. A federal appeals court on Thursday reinstated the most sweeping of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, just a day after a trade ruling found his tariffs to be illegal, adding more confusion and uncertainty around his reckless tariffs. Polling stations are open until 6 p.m. today for the second of the 2 days of early voting in the presidential election. We connect right away with our An Sung-jin standing by at one of the polling stations. Hello there, Sung-jin.
Good morning, Tami.
So Sung-jin, I am aware you are at the same polling station as you were yesterday. How's the second and final day looking this morning?
Right, Tami. I'm currently at an early voting location in Yeoksamdong, Gangnam-gu district, an area bustling with offices and business people. I was here since early in the morning, and we saw an influx of voters coming in to vote before they headed to work. Yesterday, we saw the highest voter turnout rate ever for early voting, which first took place in 2014 for national elections. But today, it seems a little bit more calmer compared to the same time yesterday when we got here. However, over time, starting from 8 till 9 a.m., the line has begun much longer, so we'll have to keep an eye on it till this afternoon. As we head into the last day of early voting, have a listen to what some of the voters have to say.
I came to vote early before going to work, regardless of who becomes the next president. I think it's important to vote.
I think voting is the least we can do. I wish that the next government will be fair and transparent and bring more change for those in their 20s and 30s.
So, Sung-jin, like you mentioned, we already saw a record high early voting figure on the first day yesterday. How are the figures looking 4 hours into the voting today?
Right, if we take a closer look at the number of people who have already cast their vote starting from 9 a.m., at this polling station I'm at, 1,845 people have voted and a total of 223,978 for Seoul. Other major cities like Busan saw 53,151 people, Daegu 35,508, and Sejong 8,619. However, as we just passed 10 a.m., new figures should be out, which I will be back with later in our news upcast.
And Sung-jin, again, today is the last day voters can cast their ballots in the early voting. Walk us through the voting procedure one more time. And how is the National Election Commission ensuring a transparent election?
To begin with, early voting takes place for 2 days, Thursday and Friday, from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. Voters must be over 18 and bring a government-issued ID. I just mentioned the number of voters per hour, which is actually a new measure for the presidential election this time that the NEC announced. The number of voters per hour will be disclosed by each polling station per hour for the first time. The process of verifying vote counting officials will be also strengthened after accusations over the use of Chinese voting officials in 2020. The NEC emphasized that in this election, all 260,000 voting and counting officials are Korean nationals. Ballot boxes will be monitored around the clock, and the NEC will also operate a fair election observation team for the first time to observe the entire election process from voting to counting. That's all I have for now, and I will be back with more updates for our later newscast.
All right, Sung-jin, thank you so much for the report this morning. Before early voting ends today, on Friday, we head into the weekend before the election. And we have our political correspondent, Oh Soo-young, in studio with us. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Lovely to be here as always, Tammy.
So, Soo-young, let's start with this highest ever turnout for early voting on day one.
Sure, Tammy. So Thursday's turnout saw a percentage of 19.58, setting an all-time high for a presidential election, as over 8.6 million out of a total 44.3 million eligible voters cast their ballots within a 12-hour time frame. With this unprecedented high for day one, there is now a strong possibility that by the end of Friday, the total early voting figures this year will top the record figure reached in the previous presidential race in 2022, which was 36.93%. Now, by region, Jeollanam-do province, a progressive stronghold, recorded the highest early voting rate at 34.96%, while the conservative stronghold of Daegu recorded the lowest at 13.42%. Now, in the capital region, considered the most fiercely contested battleground and a barometer of public sentiment, Seoul recorded a turnout of 19.13%, which is slightly below the national average, but it's still an increase compared to the 17.31% seen on the first day of the 2022 election. Now, Incheon's early voting rate was 18.40%, and Gyeonggi-do province, which has the largest number of voters nationwide, recorded 18.24%.
Then, Soo-young, any clue as to what this high turnout may indicate about the final result?
Well, historically and globally, Tammy, early voting or alternative forms of voting, such as by post or online, have traditionally been associated with younger voters as well as progressive votes. And here in Korea, it has typically been favoured by voters in their 20s and 30s, as well as the generally left-leaning middle-aged voters in their 40s and 50s, with turnout among them reported to be 5 to 10 percentage points higher than on the actual voting day. As recently as the general election last year, where the Democratic Party won 175 seats, early voting reached 31.28%, the highest for any parliamentary race. But then again, Conservative President Yoon Suk-yeol, of course, he won the 2022 race with a record high early voting rate as well. So, of course, if we look at presidential elections, they do tend to see a higher overall turnout. And voters aged 70 and above, they tend to be conservative. So they might also turn up in swarms on the actual day of voting. In response to this year's early voting, the DP has said that early voting reflects the outrage against the Conservative camp, which, of course, is associated with impeached President Yoon's martial law. However, the People Power Party says that the turnout simply rose due to increased political interest from both sides, and that Conservative regions do tend to see stronger turnout on election day. So that's why some analysts say that early voting no longer disproportionately favours one side. So when early voting was still relatively new a couple of years ago, young Koreans did show higher participation, while turnout among older voters was relatively low. But now we expect to see even the elderly participate in large numbers in early voting. So that would make it rather hard to conclude which side now benefits. What we do know, however, is that casting an early vote usually means that the voter they have firmly made up their minds on who to vote for.
Well, Soo-young, we are currently in this so-called blackout period, meaning polls are banned for 6 days until the election day. Now, that means it's hard to determine public sentiment, but can we potentially see a highest overall turnout?
Well, Tammy, recent polls released this week before the blackout period show that 8 in 10 voters do intend to participate in this presidential election. And in a voter awareness survey conducted by Gallup Korea earlier this week, 86.8% of respondents say that they would definitely vote in the upcoming election. And that's 3.8 percentage points higher than the 83% reported ahead of the 2022 presidential race. Among those who intend to vote, 37% said that they plan to cast their ballots during the early voting period, and that's up 10 percentage points from the previous election. And the actual voter turnout in the 20th presidential election, the overall turnout, was 77.1%, with early voting making up almost 1 in 4 votes. So we're really going to have to wait and see what the early turnout will be and how it's going to compare to the overall number of votes to draw any kind of meaningful pattern or conclusions.
Definitely. Well, early voting is open until 6 p.m. tonight. I'll see you back here on next Monday, Soo-young.
Sure, Dami. Have a lovely weekend.
You too. And the presidential runners are going all out for the next 4 days until the actual big day. The Liberal Party's Lee Jae-myung cast his ballot early on Thursday here in Seoul, is seeking support in the biggest battleground. Our Sinchon reports.
Marking the first day of early voting in the snap presidential election, Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung kicked off his campaign on Thursday morning after casting his ballot in Sinchon, Seoul, an area known for its many universities. After voting alongside young people, he encouraged the public to vote, emphasizing that it was the strongest way for them to exercise their sovereignty.
We can overcome the insurrection if people come out to vote. I chose to vote alongside young people because I hope this election marks the start of a new era for South Korea, led by its youth.
The DP also focused its efforts on encouraging people to vote. Even though early voting takes place on weekdays, the party believes it's crucial to bring as many supporters as possible to the polls to secure victory in the presidential election. They urged voters to take part and clearly show who truly holds power in the country. Lee later addressed supporters again in the capital, including in Seoul district, one of Seoul's busiest transit hubs.
During his campaign in Seoul's Seoul district, Lee Jae-myung outlined plans to develop the area into a hub for K-culture and make the Gangnam region a more competitive and innovative center of the city's economy.
Ahead of Thursday's rallies, Lee joined a meeting on supporting startups where he discussed expanding the research and development budget and easing regulations.
We're now in a time when the private sector is more advanced than the public sector, so we need to shift the direction of the administration. That includes creating a chief policy coordinator for AI at the presidential office and boosting the National Artificial Intelligence Committee.
Lee will continue his campaign in Gangwon-do province on Friday, where rival Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party is also scheduled to hold rallies. 신하영, Arirang News.
The Conservative Party's Kim Moon-soo also voted early at his main rival Lee Jae-myung's congressional district, while calling for stronger voter participation for democracy. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
With the election campaign coming to the final stages as early voting started on Thursday, the People Power Party's presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo focused on making a comeback. His rallies for the day were called the beginning of a great comeback, and he said he's done it before some 30 years ago when he first ran for a seat in the parliament.
I was third until the last 3 days before the election, but won it to become a lawmaker. Who picks parliamentary members? Citizens do. Who picks the president? Citizens do. We call this democracy, right?
The idea of a comeback comes as the election comes from PPP's former president having been impeached and it needing a strong change in narrative. It showed at the rallies. Kim made his way to rallies here in the central part of the capital region in Gyeonggi-do province after kicking off his day in the western port city of Incheon. The route is symbolic, echoing the Incheon landing operation during the Korean War, a turning point that shifted the tide of the war. He also urged people to vote during early voting for his own ballot. He chose to do it at his rival Lee Jae-myung's congressional district. While the party said the message was clear, Kim said he didn't try to force the idea.
Well, it's not just about Lee Jae-myung, but my daughter lives in Bucheon, right across the street here. We just stopped by on our way to other rallies. Lee Jae-myung could be one of the reasons.
Kim also told voters that the early voting process will be managed fairly, though some question the process as the transportation and opening of the ballot is more complicated than regular voting. He said not voting is a bigger problem. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Also on Thursday, Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok cast his ballot at an early voting station in Hwaseong, Gyeonggi-do province, which he added was the closest to where he lives. On his campaign agenda for Thursday were talks with tech workers, college students, and a visit to a popular street food alley in Central Tower. Also, pundits believe a merger between Lee Jun-seok and People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo is now essentially out of the equation as early voting has kicked off. A U.S. appeals court has temporarily allowed U.S. President Donald Trump's import tariffs to remain in effect after a lower court ruled Wednesday they were illegal. Our Kim Jung-sil has more.
A U.S. appeals court has allowed President Trump's trade tariffs to stay in place for now by putting a temporary hold on a lower court's decision to block them. This puts on hold Wednesday's ruling by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which said Trump had gone beyond his legal powers in imposing sweeping tariffs on imports under an emergency powers law. The law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, says the president may use its powers only to address unusual and extraordinary national security threats. The court said IEEPA does not give the president full control over trade policy. But on Thursday, the appeals court said that decision would not be enforced while judges review the case. It gave the plaintiffs until June 5th to file their response. Also on Thursday, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. issued a separate ruling finding parts of Trump's tariff policy unlawful. The judge wrote that the IEEPA does not enable the president to unilaterally impose, revoke, pause, reinstate, and adjust tariffs to reorder the global economy. Earlier that day, the White House defended the tariffs, saying they're necessary to protect American industries.
How are you? Wow. President Trump is in the process of rebalancing America's trading agreements with the entire world, bringing tens of billions of dollars in tariff revenues to our country, and finally ending the United States of America from being ripped off.
With legal challenges mounting, the future of the tariffs remains uncertain. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
And economists and diplomatic experts have gathered on South Korea's southern Jeju Island for an international peace forum, where growing uncertainty of Trump's trade policies were at the center of discussion. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae-eun-ji, was there.
Experts are now warning that U.S. President Donald Trump's economic policies could have conflicting consequences that do not necessarily promote economic growth or increase productivity in the country's economy. Speaking on Thursday at an international peace forum held on Jeju Island, Jeffrey Schott, a senior fellow from Peterson Institute for International Economics, said uncertainty about the size and duration of tariffs will discourage or delay investment decisions.
And so the climate is even more uncertain, and uncertainty is a tax on doing business. That's a lesson in economics that I think the Trump administration is only now beginning to learn.
South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, has been seeking a trade deal with the Trump administration before the July 8th deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted. Scott Snyder, the head of the Korea Economic Institute of America, who's also at the Jeju Forum, explained there will be a series of deals, adding that although the current focus is on tariffs, there will be another negotiation on security.
I would say deal by deal. Deal by deal. And I think that is going to go on maybe for the entire Trump administration. New things will pop up. They will require negotiation. And so I think that's what will happen, and I think it will be ongoing. It will be stressful. But I think that until both sides come to a place where they're satisfied with everything, President Trump's style is to want to make deals. But I don't believe that it's going to be one big, beautiful deal.
He suggested it would be important for the Korean government to have negotiation strategies to make sure that what Trump is trying to do is perceived as too costly. He also noted that shipbuilding is clearly an area where South Korea has a set of technologies that the U.S. is in need of.
Amid more uncertainty over Trump's tariff policies, especially following the latest decision from the U.S. Trade Court, eyes are now on how the trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington will play out. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News, Jeju.
The Trump administration has begun the process of barring Harvard University from enrolling international students, but the courts have again blocked it. The U.S. State Department said that the review of student visas will resume soon. Lee Seung-ja has the details.
Last week, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's decision to revoke Harvard University's ability to enroll international students. This put the brakes on the government's plan to take away Harvard's certification in the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, which allows schools in the U.S. to host international students with proper visas. However, the government notified the Ivy League school once again on Wednesday that it would revoke the program despite the court injunction. The Trump administration on Thursday gave Harvard 30 days to contest the government's move to revoke its Student and Exchange Visitor Program. In a notice of intent sent by the U.S. Department of Homeland on Wednesday, it said that the school has 30 calendar days to submit written representation under oath and supported by documentary evidence, setting forth why SCVP should not be withdrawn from Harvard's certification. However, this too was blocked by a federal judge who said that she would issue a preliminary injunction that would allow the school to continue enrolling international students. In the meantime, the U.S. State Department hinted at the resumption of student visa interviews, which were suspended earlier this week in order to introduce a new social media screening system. The Trump administration has been arguing that Harvard has failed to maintain a campus environment free from violence and anti-Semitism, arguing that the school should be stripped of their ability to enroll international students. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Israel has approved a new U.S.-backed ceasefire proposal developed by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. It has also reportedly been presented to Hamas and is currently under review. On Thursday, May 29th, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that Israel had signed off on a 60-day ceasefire proposal before it was submitted to Hamas. The proposal includes the release of 10 living and 18 deceased Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees, along with terms for increased humanitarian aid to Gaza. However, Hamas has responded with reservations, stating that it does not meet key demands, such as a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Hamas official Bassem Naim said the proposal does not respond to any of our people's demands, foremost among which is stopping the war and famine. Canada's state of Manitoba is facing severe wildfires, prompting the declaration of a province-wide state of emergency. Over 17,000 residents have been evacuated. On Thursday local time, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew announced a state of emergency due to wildfires that have already burned approximately 491,000 acres. The city of Flin Flon, home to 5,000 people, was under a mandatory evacuation order. The Canadian Armed Forces have been deployed to assist in the evacuation, airlifting residents from remote communities. There are concerns about whether the fires can be contained, with the situation made worse by abnormally dry conditions and a lack of significant rainfall in the forecast. Premier Kinew said this is the largest evacuation Manitoba will have seen in most people's living memory. Meanwhile, smoke from the blazes is affecting air quality in some U.S. cities such as Chicago and Detroit. In Brazil, hyper-realistic reborn baby dolls designed and handcrafted to resemble real infants are growing in popularity, stirring both fascination and controversy. Videos featuring emotional interactions with these dolls have gone viral, with influencers staging scenarios such as simulated births and public outings. While a bill has been passed honoring reborn doll artisans, a lawmaker proposed banning public healthcare services for the dolls following a video of a woman taking one to a hospital. Critics argue that the attention given to the reborn doll community distracts from more pressing societal issues. Proponents defend the practice, citing therapeutic benefits. Finally, in the United States, Washington, D.C. is preparing for its World Pride 2025 event, slated for Saturday, May 31st. Before raising the pride flag to usher in the biennial event, the D.C. mayor said the flag tells a story of pride, perseverance, and progress. This marks the 50th anniversary of Pride in the U.S. Capitol, and the city expects up to 3 million attendees for the celebration. A welcome concert by Shakira will be held at Nationals Park to kick off the event, which will run until the end of June.
Brace for a weekend heat wave. Starting today, Seoul's daytime high will climb to 29 degrees Celsius, and we will see temperatures close to 30 degrees through the entire weekend. But as you can see, if you're dressing for the afternoon, it might feel too breezy in the mornings and evenings, so be sure to keep a light jacket handy. Most parts of Korea will be under strong sunshine, but passing rain is expected in the southern coastal regions with 5 to 10 millimeters in the forecast during the day. And Seoul will be nearing 30 degrees this afternoon. Daejeon, Gwangju will make it to 27 degrees, but at least humidity is not too high just yet, so it should still feel pleasant in the shade. Again, a hot and sunny weekend ahead to welcome June. Then early next week, rain is expected in the southern coast and Jeju Island, which should bring a welcome break from the heat.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.